Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Athletic Hockey Show. I'm Sean McIndoe with another edition of How Do We Fix This Team? This is the summer series we've been doing where we check in on 10 teams that could maybe use a bit of help. And we see how we can get them into the playoffs and beyond. And today, it's a bit of a unique one, and I'll get into that in a second. But we're taking a look at the Ottawa Senators, and I'm joined by Julian McKenzie, our Senators writer and national writer for The Athletic. Julian, how's it going?
It's going well, man. Hopefully you're enjoying your summer. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Okay. So this is an interesting one because we have done or will do 10 of these altogether. And the Ottawa Senators are the only team on the list that made the playoffs last year. You may have noticed I stumbled just a bit in the intro because typically we say this is how we're going to get this team back to the playoffs, and we don't have to do that for Ottawa. They've been in the playoffs 2 years in a row. They were the ninth best team, it says here, in the NHL last season, 99 points. Maybe we get them back to winning a game in the playoffs would be the goal, but it is certainly, I feel comfortable saying this is the best team that we have talked about in this series, which is maybe damning with faint praise a little bit, but there are obvious reasons why we're talking about these guys. So we have been dividing this into the position groups, forward, defense, goalies. I don't think there's any question where we start with Ottawa. Life after Brady Tkachuk. The captain is gone, arguably the best player on the team. Some would say definitely one of the key contributors is gone. Let's maybe even before we start replacing him, let's just go back to that trade because it's been a little while now. How shocked, if at all, were you when you heard that? Yeah, after years of everyone saying Brady was just going to go to Florida to play with his brother, that is exactly what happened. On a scale of 1 to 10, what was the surprise factor for you?
I'm somewhere between a 6 and a 7. And maybe that's a little higher than most, but I just felt that with the way things were revolving around Brady Tkachuk, even if it does make sense that he might look at the situation and the waters and say, you know what, now's the time to get out and leave and go play in Florida and play with my brother, but not explicitly say that I'm doing this to play with my brother, but you get what I mean. There was a part of me that thought that in spite of everything that had gone on this past year, maybe you stick it out for one more year and you make this work because of the fact that you made it to the playoffs back-to-back years. And even in that second year where you get swept by the Carolina Hurricanes, you still ran up against the now current Cup champion. You ran up against a really good team. You ran up against a team which, and I'm sure we'll get into this later on in this episode, the Senators could learn a thing or two or three or 5 or 10 things about the Carolina Hurricanes. That might end up being their like inspiration going forward in terms of a team they'd like to emulate because of the defensive structure, the culture, all of that. But Brady Tkachuk decided, you know what? Now's the time to leave. And yes, like that comes after he said, you know what? I'm frustrated with my name being out there and all that. And I guess I kind of thought, you know what? Because of everything he had in Ottawa, because of the fact that yeah, the allure of going stateside is out there. Next year could be sort of like a last dance sort of thing, even if he might not explicitly say that it was. That's where my brain was going with all of this. So that's why I was more surprised than I think most, because I think a lot of people, particularly in this market, immediately went to the thoughts and feelings of, well, this day was probably going to come and now it's here. Because as much as people were defending this, I think a lot of people felt it was inevitable he was going to leave.
And let's get into that. The reaction was fascinating to me. We're both located in Ottawa, and when I saw the news drop on Father's Day, I thought I thought a few things. I said, first, what a blockbuster, what a huge trade. Obviously the ramifications for both the Senators and the Panthers and all that hockey stuff. But then my second thought pretty quickly after that was, oh man, this Senators fan base is going to be devastated. They're going to be furious because for the last 5 years, if you wanted to pick a fight with a Senators fan, this is the card you pulled, right? Brady's going to leave. Brady doesn't really want to be there. Brady's going to go to Florida and play with his brother, and you know it, and all of this stuff, and then it actually plays out, and this fan base that had defended this guy and pumped his tires and, maybe overlook some of the antics and that sort of thing, now he turns their back. The captain is bailing on the ship, and I thought, man, these fans are going to be furious. And then I kind of went looking for the reaction, and I was surprised. It seemed like while there was some of that, there was an awful lot of Ottawa fans who were going, you know what, good. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to turn the page. I was getting tired of the act. And that surprised me. So I guess my question to you is, did this fan base just flip on a dime here on this guy? Or was there an undercurrent here that maybe people like me were missing because we're not directly plugged into this team the way you are? Was there a little bit of growing frustration in this market with the whole Brady Tkachuk experience?
This past year led to that undercurrent, I would say. A lot of fans felt disenchanted with Tkachuk over how it felt as if there were some inconsistencies with his play, which is kind of funny when you look at his stats. Even though he missed a quarter of the year with a thumb injury, he was still a near point per game player, but he wasn't scrapping or fighting or going into the hard areas as many would like him to. Just some of the different attributes we expect of a power forward type player like Brady Tkachuk, for whatever reason, a lot of fans felt was not there sufficiently enough. And then, of course, the gold medal experience with Team USA and all the celebrating after the fact. Like, even the first game back he had, like, there were a few fans who were kind of muted, to say the best, in their praise for Brady Tkachuk and his gold medal victory and the way that he handled certain questions in the media after the fact. I don't know if you remember, there was the TikTok video that the White House put out where they manipulated his voice to make it seem as if he was talking crap about Canada when it was not, in fact, the case. And I think some people were left dissatisfied with that entire experience. And I think it plays into why some people felt, you know what, now that he's gone, there's a sense of relief. There's also a pocket of Sens fans who are happy about the trade because of the fact that at least they got a good return out of it in their eyes. They got 3 first-round picks out of that, and they were able to flip one of those picks for William Eklund out in San Jose. They're, like, for another story I was working on a couple months ago, there were a few fans who were like, yeah, like, at least we got something for Brady Tkachuk. Like, and I think a few more fans, as time goes on, they will bring that fact up. The fact that at least Brady Tkachuk said, you know what, I'm not going to re-sign, and he gave the team an opportunity to trade him for assets, like what his brother Matthew did in Calgary. I think more and more fans, and maybe this is a more general thing to speak of with other players, more fans are processing the fact that the idea of being a lifer like a Sidney Crosby playing for the same team, that is becoming rarer and rarer as time goes on. So if you put yourself in a position where you might not want to play or stick it out for the entirety of your contract, but you give your team an opportunity to trade and get something for you, your legacy in your now previous city could stand out better versus if you decide to leave for nothing.
And that was, a not a small part of this is that Brady Tkachuk reportedly gave the Senators a very short list of teams. And even then it was apparent that there was only one team. He wanted to go to the Panthers. Given that, you got to give some credit to Steve Staios and the Senators front office to get 3 first-round picks plus a second. they didn't get any immediate help. And yeah, maybe there's some guys you look at on that Panthers roster and you say, it would have been nice if they could have pried that guy away. But to get 3 first-round, but the list of guys in the NHL who've been traded for 3 first-round picks in one shot is it's an extremely small list, and it's a very weird one. It's Wayne Gretzky, obviously in the trade, where there were 3 first-round picks in addition to all the money and everything else. It's Glenn Wesley, who got traded from Boston to Hartford for 3 first-round picks. And which was very funny because Jim Rutherford, the GM of Hartford at the time, was like, we never hit on our first round picks anyway, so we might as well trade. And I was like, okay. And then if you think Glenn Wesley's, Mikhail Renberg got traded for 4 first round picks, but that was in some offer sheet weirdness where one team, they signed Chris Gratton, they gave up the 4 first round picks, and then the other team said, we'll give you the picks back, but instead we want this guy, and this guy. And so that's how it worked out. The point being, we have seen some very, very good players, superstar players in this league traded for certainly not the haul of draft picks that Brady Tkachuk got. And I guess, I look at this guy, put aside the politics and the podcast and the distractions and all of that. This is a guy who has had exactly 1 season in his career where he was a point-a-game player. And that was a year where he got 83 points in an 82-game season. So he just cleared the bar. Obviously, he brings things to the table that increasingly are hard to find in this league. So he's not a guy you measure just by points. But is he a superstar? Is he a guy that leads a team into Stanley Cup contention? I don't know. And I guess now we won't find out in Ottawa. You mentioned William Eklund. You mentioned what they did with the picks. Is there a case to be made that the Senators up front are going to be better heading into next year than they were? Claude Giroux's back, not any other really earth-shattering offseason moves. Is what's the optimist view here? Like, is this like William Eklund isn't going to replace Brady Tkachuk as that type of player, but can he replace the offense? Can it work better? I guess is what I'm asking, despite the fact that they had to trade their captain away without getting any immediate help back from the Panthers.
I always felt with the way that Tkachuk trade went down, you couldn't just replace Brady Tkachuk with one player. And unless the Sens had like some kind of like chamber in the bottom at the basement of the CTC where they're able to clone Brady Tkachuk, like, there was no way you were going to replace him with one player. Their hope with William Eklund, who has been a 50-point player the last 2 seasons in San Jose, is that he could grow into a 60 or a 70-point frontline player who has shown that he's able to score goals, maybe not so much in bunches as a 30-goal scorer, but someone who at least has the potential to at least get better in that regard, while also being able to play in a top 6 role with some of the team's best centers, including Tim Stutzle. And Dylan Cousins is currently in that spot right now, but I've seen other people's depth charts and they're wondering, hey, maybe you put Dylan Cousins on the wing, maybe you move Ridley Gregg into a center position, which speaks to a really underrated part about this team. They have depth on the forward side. Like, the fact that you have different players, I'd even mentioned Shane Pinto, who can go in and out of a center position. You could put them on wing if you want to, but my expectation is a Tim Stutzle, Dylan Cousins, Shane Pinto, 1, 2, 3 down the middle. Like, that I think is their big strength. And then you figure out who's going to be their 4C, because Lars Eller is no longer on this team. He actually signed with the Florida Panthers and joined Brady Tkachuk over there. Maybe you put in a guy like Stephen Halliday in that spot, a good young player who showed promise this past year. Or if you need Claude Giroux to be an everyday center, that could be it too. But you don't need him to be an everyday center on this team. He can play on the wing, which, by the way, with Claude Giroux, I don't know if people realize this. He ended last year with the league's best faceoff rate. He was not an everyday center, but that was a player that the Ottawa Senators relied upon in late game situations where they needed a faceoff, and he had the highest faceoff rate of anybody in the NHL. This team is deep at forward. The one thing I think they're just missing is just like a high-end finisher, a superstar player who could round out that core. But to go back to the Carolina Hurricanes for a second here, off top of your head, how many guys on that team, particularly at forward, could you say are in the top 20, maybe top 25 in the NHL?
Yeah, I would not put Sebastian Aho on that list. And certainly the guys on the second line were playing that way in the playoffs. But I heading into the season, I think maybe there's the answer is there's nobody. So it can be done.
That's my whole thing. Like, Tim Stutzle is probably the best example of a guy who could be knocking on the door of a top 20, top 25 guy. But if this forward core is able to basically replicate what they were able to do last year, which is play a tight defensive system, that's everybody on this roster, find opportunities to score where you can. Remember, they still have Drake Batherson, who gets better and better every year when it comes to putting the puck in the net, including Tim Stutzle up front in that top six as well. You're hoping guys like a Warren Fogle and Fabian Zetterlund can contribute sufficiently as secondary contributors. If you get an all-around contribution from guys in this lineup and you're still able to frustrate teams defensively, you could be a playoff team. My biggest question is, can that still carry over into next year as the Atlantic Division has seemingly gotten better, with the Panthers getting better, the Leafs getting better. The Buffalo Sabres are no longer a doormat in this division, right? Like, the Montreal Canadiens, like they're a team with a lot of good young pieces that are trying to get better. The Tampa Bay Lightning are still the Tampa Bay Lightning. Even if they take a step back, you can't sleep on those guys. That Atlantic Division is really tough. So the Senators need a lot of things to go right, and it starts at forward. I mean, yes, goaltending, it probably starts there, but their forward core needs to pick up the slack with a guy like Brady Tkachuk gone. And one more thing I'll add, they had a winning record with him out of the lineup last year. They're going to hang on that.
It was quite good, right? It was, I don't have it in front of me, but I mean, it was a winning record, not by a point or two, if I remember. It was pretty good.
Had at least 11 wins with that. And feel free to correct me with the actual stat, but at least 11 wins in the handful of games they did not have Brady Tkachuk in the lineup. It was a winning record.
So one last question on forwards, and then we'll move to the blue line. We've talked about, this team, they've got the pieces, but they don't have necessarily the superstar, and maybe you need that, maybe you don't. This team is drafted well over the years, so there is the prospect pipeline is okay, but there's no stars coming from there. And as we're recording this, at least, they haven't really added anyone in the offseason other than Eklund, who sort of comes into the Tkachuk spot. Even attracting players in Ottawa as a market can sometimes be a little bit tricky. So I guess if there's going to be that star, it feels like it's somebody who's already here, who's going to break out and find that next level. And there are a lot of guys on this team who are in that like 23 to 27 age range, where usually by the time you get there, you are what you are, but some guys do find that next level at that point. If you had to pick one guy on this roster up front who maybe is going to have that breakout, who's maybe going to take that step and become, let's not say a superstar, but become something more than he is now, to the enough that it moves the needle for the whole team, is there somebody that stands out to you as someone you'd pick?
So that depends on how you view Tim Stutzle already in this league. I know we kind of established maybe the Sens might not have a top 20, top 25 guy, but he's the best player on this team.
I think he's a really good player, but I would put him on the list of guys who could have another level. I think when you look at him 2 or 3 years ago when he had his 90-point season, you kind of felt like, here we go. The rocket has been strapped to this guy, and he's been perfectly good since then, but the rocket never seemed to fire.
I think it's still there's still juice in that rocket. Like, this is a guy who, like, I wrote about him last year, and you could make the argument maybe he established himself as a superstar. Then I think a lot of people around the league recognize this dude has skill, he has talent, and maybe his biggest flaw is that he doesn't shoot the puck enough. This is a guy who could be a 30-goal scorer every year if he wants to, but he's also committed himself to doing so many great things, like playing a two-way game and being a better defensive center. A guy who committed himself to being a really good face-off guy. There was a point in the year where his face-off rate was above 60%. He had never finished a year leading up to last year where his face-offs were better than like 49% as far as I remember. Like, Tim Stutzle is a guy who maybe a little too much puts it on himself to be a better player. And I think there's a perfect recipe or a perfect storm brewing where maybe people on the outside are looking at the Ottawa Senators and they're sleeping on them, and everyone's going to want to talk about Brady. I know for sure when we talk to Tim Stutzle about it, he's going to put on his best face and be like, we don't need to talk about this guy anymore. He's not on the team. He'll say some nice stuff publicly, but this is a guy who maybe more than anybody on that team is going to want to move on from all of this and focus on everything on the ice. You could make the argument he could be the guy. You could make the argument Jake Sanderson is that guy, unless you wanted to keep it just to forwards. But if you want to keep it just to forwards, Stutzle, Drake Batherson too. I mentioned the fact that this is a guy who's getting better and better every year. He had 33 goals last year, his best year as a pro, and a guy entering his peak, you're hoping that he stays at that level, if not better. It's really going to come down, I think, to those two frontline guys, at least in terms of attackers. And also something to keep in mind too, as we have at this point, or as when we're recording, they haven't named a captain yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Stutzle's the guy. Maybe Sanderson's the guy. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of change that could be coming into this group, even if they haven't made a ton of trades, so to speak, to this point.
Okay, so I mean, you mentioned Sanderson, and that is what we in this business call a Frankie Corrado level segue. Fantastic work, because it takes us right to the blue line, which didn't change a whole lot, but Sanderson's obviously the guy. He's a guy that, yeah, let's get into it. Who is the next captain of this team? We don't know that at this point. And is it Tim Stutzle? Does he have the personality? Is it Jake Sanderson, who is the young star who normally, you would think he'd be the next guy, but do they want to give it to another Team USA guy, or, how do we do that? Does that matter? Is that part of it? What's your bet on who's going to be wearing the C, if anybody, heading into next year?
I think it's a great question. I think Tim Stutzle makes sense as a pick because of the fact that he obviously cares about his teammates. He wants to win. He wants to be in Ottawa. Jake Sanderson, I understand the hesitancy with picking another American guy to be the captain, but this is a guy who's also committed for the next few seasons with this team and wants to be here and wants to be in this dressing room. If it were up to me, I would just let those two guys be those two guys. You give them A's, you let them thrive on their own, and don't give them that extra spotlight. Let them be themselves and don't give them that extra spotlight. I would much rather give it to a veteran player. And there's one guy on this team who's played on this team longer than those two guys, who, in terms of speaking to the media, can do it in both languages. And I get that the health is up there here and there with him. And last year he tried to play through that busted up arm. But that's a guy who's going to give you everything every night. And that's Thomas Chabot. I think he's the right guy to be the captain of this team. You put a veteran guy who knows everything you need to know about playing in that market, can speak to being English and being able to speak French as well as a native French speaker, is a loved guy in that room from defense to forwards onward. Like, I would much rather this group go towards the Thomas Chabot lane, where you name a veteran, a guy who knows everything it takes to play in this market, as opposed to just putting your young players like a Stutzle and a Sanderson, who are very well worthy of an honor like a C. But do you need that extra spotlight on them? I would much rather just give it to Thomas Chabot. I would much rather do that.
I'm sold. You've sold me. Okay, so when we're doing these shows, we sort of spend as much time on each position group as we need to. I not that long ago recorded the Columbus version with Portsy, and we talked blue line for most of the show because of the Zach Werenski stuff. Here, the blue line is largely unchanged. They were good last year. Maybe not great, there isn't a Zach Werenski quite yet here, but it's in good shape. It looks good. Is there really all that much to say here, or is this a case of, if it's not broke, don't fix it, keep the band together, and that's what they did?
I think they might be thinking of that, but I also wondered if they were looking to add another defender to shore up their depth. But if this is the defense core that goes into it, this might be more than sufficient. I mean, Jake Sanderson, you mentioned him not exactly being a Zach Werenski, but those two are friends. And I think he definitely sees him as a comparable, as someone he would like to play, like a guy who can play well at both ends of the ice, a guy who can play tons of minutes. Like, I think the Zach Werenski lane for Jake Sanderson is probably the perfect guy to emulate in terms of what they're both able to do on the ice. And you could do worse than have a guy who I think is already in the top 10, no worse than top 15 in terms of defensemen in the league. The biggest question for me, and I recognize too with Sanderson, he'll likely start the season on a pairing with Artem Zub. The second pairing is where I'm going to be very intrigued about, because right now you're probably going into this season with Thomas Chabot and Jordan Spence. And Jordan Spence at the beginning of last year did not start the first few games of the season with this team.
That was
right?
Weird, right? Because he was
very weird.
Really good once he got in, and well, maybe not once he got in. But once he got in, and it felt like he was no longer playing for a spot in the lineup every single night. I thought he was one of the better players on the team, certainly like compared to expectations. This guy came in and did everything they asked and a bit more. But it took them a while to warm up to him, it felt like.
Yeah, I think a big reason why is because, speaking of comparables, at the beginning of the year, I think the Sens were a bit obsessed, maybe not obsessed, but they had the Florida Panthers in mind. And the Florida Panthers are a team.
Yeah, one of them did for sure, yeah.
For sure. They're locked up in terms of big, rangy defensemen with size. Mm-hmm. And a guy like Jordan Spence at under 6 feet doesn't necessarily fit into that model. Case in point, their first 2 games of the year against Tampa and Florida, Jordan Spence doesn't play those games. But as he gets into the lineup and he showcases his offense and gets better with playing with the defensive structure that Travis Green and the group want him to play, trying to get him to use his body a little bit more. Maybe he's not necessarily going to be great at that ever, but the fact that he's able to generate offense from the back end, that is his calling card. Also, I'm going to bring up the Carolina Hurricanes again. That is a team that proved that you don't need a defense core that has everyone 6 feet and above. They won with 2 guys below 6 feet, like Sean Walker and Shane Gostisbehere. Mind you, Sean Walker plays a very physical style, and Shane Gostisbehere is a very good offensive generator from the back end. And I think they're hoping for the latter with Jordan Spence. That being said, it wouldn't surprise me if this team put themselves in a situation where they could compete for a playoff spot and they could get themselves a really good big defenseman, or hey, maybe Nicholas Montempaulo, who I think is a much better skater than people give him credit to, is currently the number 7 defenseman on this team. If he plays himself into the lineup more, maybe he's the answer. They have depth at the back end, but similar to their forward core, maybe you need another star to put this team over the top. But I'm going to be looking at that second pairing and where they slot Jordan Spence in all of this, because he provides a lot of offense despite his size. He's a really good piece for this team.
And if they do decide they need another piece, they do still have some of that ammo from the Panthers and the Brady Tkachuk trade in their back pocket. So that's worth keeping in mind.
I didn't even mention Carter Yakubchuk unless you were going to go there too, because that's a whole other question in itself.
Let's get into that, because this I'll go ahead and say blue chip prospect, high draft pick, big expectations, but it's often a tough transition for young defensemen to come in. How much should Senators fans expect from him? How much should the rest of the league expect this kid to be able to deliver immediately in his essentially his first full season as a big leaguer?
Yeah, if it comes out, if the lineup is set as it is right now, all he needs is a solid training camp and he gets a roster spot, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I think there's a really good opportunity for Carter Yakubchuk to start the season with the Ottawa Senators, unless they make some drastic change on the back end, and then it puts him back in the American League, which might not be the worst thing in the world. You want your best prospects to marinate and get better, so that way, if they make it undeniable for them to be in your NHL lineup, you feel a lot better for that. Carter Yakubchuk, in the limited amount of time he played with the Senators last year, particularly offensively, he impressed. He provided offense. He showcased skill. He's an option on the power play, and not even necessarily as a power play quarterback. You could put him in the Ovechkin spot. He has a wicked shot. Like, he has, particularly offensively, the capabilities of playing at the NHL level. It's all about what he can do defensively. Is the gap control there? Is he able to lock down defensively on opposing players? Is he able to win possessions along the boards and not make mistakes when he has the puck? The defense needs to be better, and that's always been the thing with Carter Yakubchuk. But as it stands right now, he has a really good opportunity to make this regular season lineup, and we'll see how it goes for him in the regular season if it gets to that point. But I would hope that he takes all the good stuff that he was able to put together in the limited amount of time he had in the regular season last year, just work on that while just being as simple as he could. And I trust that the Sens would also put him in the best possible position as well in this lineup, and not necessarily just putting him out to dry. I don't think they'd want that for their prospect. It's going to take some time too, and we see it with young players all the time where playing a full 82 game season with all the travel, sometimes you're playing back-to-backs, like some guys it takes them a second and then they go through a lull partway through the year. That might happen for Carter Yakupchuk. He might think a little too hard on the puck. He might make mistakes. He's a young player. It's bound to happen. But I think for fans, if he just gets into the lineup and he gets opportunities, that is a win in itself for, you said it, the blue chip prospect, the best prospect in this team's system and a big part of their future.
Yep. And the future is now for him and this blue line, which I think is in good shape. I love the Zach Werenski, Jake Sanderson comparison. I think that holds. Hopefully Werenski is mentoring him a little bit, but maybe keep Jake Sanderson off the larger Team USA group chat just to be safe. The last spot we have to talk about is goaltending. And I feel like with this Senators team, we don't know who the opening night goalie is going to be. We know his name. It's Linus Ullmark. But we don't know, is this going to be the Ullmark last year for much of the season who struggled badly and was part of a goaltending situation that, frankly, almost torpedoed this team's playoff hopes? Or are we going to get the guy that we saw kind of the last month or so of the season who started looking an awful lot like the Vezina guy from a few years before? Obviously, we know there were the off-ice questions. There was his time away from the team. There was some white noise about him, so to speak, that came from places. What should we expect from Ullmark? Is this going to be back to being a source of strength for the Senators, or are there still concerns about the goaltending?
That might end up being the $1 million question for all of this with respect to the rest of this team. Last year proved that this team could play as well as they could play. They could dominate games, they could generate chances, they could be all over teams and swarm them. But if Linus Ullmark is not playing well, they will lose games, they will lose ground. The twisted irony in all of this is that the Ottawa Senators were swept in the first round by the Carolina Hurricanes, a team that, again, we've established throughout this episode is a good comparable for them to follow. And off top of my head, I believe only 2 different players for the Ottawa Senators scored goals in that series. That's how tight it was. The best player for the Ottawa Senators in that series, who was arguably the biggest question mark, was Linus Ullmark. If Linus Ullmark starts this upcoming season playing well, I'm not saying he has to steal games, but he's solid, he's winning games, he's keeping things simple, that would be a pleasant surprise for everyone. Because if you look at the beginning of the last 2 seasons he's been here, it's been so-so to mediocre to straight bad for his starts of the year. And then around Christmas time, he picks up and gets better. Even before he took leave last season, there was a period in December where he started to look like himself. And then the Toronto game happens, and then he goes away. But then after that, he comes back, and it takes him a while, but then he gets himself into that Vezina form. It could be a situation where maybe things repeat themselves, but for the benefit of everyone, people are hoping that Vezina form continues. And now he has his goalie whisper, his goalie guru, and Maciej Schwa, part of the organization, a guy who he's known since his years in Sweden, since his teenage years in Sweden. That seemed to be a source of strength for him down the stretch with this group. That could be another source of strength for him to enter this year. And I'm also, I think we have to discuss this too, because he acknowledged it as much with us near the end of last season. this is someone who is still clearly working on himself mentally. And it's an everyday process. And we have to see how that shakes out. I don't feel uncomfortable bringing that up because it's something that he himself has acknowledged is something that he works through as much as he can. Remember, there was a game he missed when the team was in Florida, and people were wondering, like, well, why couldn't he play down the stretch? But he said he was not mentally ready to play. I don't know. Like he said it himself. He wasn't mentally ready to play. And if that is something that shows itself again in this upcoming season, that's going to be a storyline inevitably. And I'm curious to see how he and the team will handle that, which leads to something else we need to be discussing. I think we're going to see a situation where the Sens find a way to play 3 goalies at different points this year. Sam Ersson is on this team, and I've had my questions about the Sam Ersson trade turn signing.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, this is a goaltender who had the 5th worst goals saved above expected rate, and I believe it was the worst a year earlier. But this is a guy, as Steve Staios has pointed to us repeatedly, that Maciej Szwa, I believe, I don't remember his exact title with the Senator structure, but he is part of the goaltending structure alongside Justin Peters, the goaltending coach. And this is a guy who has experience with Sam Ersson, and at some point went to Steve Staios and said, hey, I believe in Sam Ersson. Get him on this team if you can. And he's going to be the backup on this team. But this group also believes in Levi Merilainen, and they don't want to give up on him. And that tells me that they're going to find ways to use him at different points. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier with Linus Ullmark. If he's still working to get himself right mentally, doesn't that mean you're going to why not give him situations where, okay, we don't need you to be, already he doesn't need to be the 60, 70 game guy. That's never been his thing. But if you want to give him an off night, you have 2 other goaltenders with NHL experience who you could play. There's so many different storylines to delve into with this team. But goaltending, I think above anything, this team is going to live and die by how well Linus Ullmark is able to perform, how well he's feeling, and how well Sam Ersson and Levi Merilainen can pick up the slack behind him.
That's absolutely fair. Okay, so we've covered the 3 positions. Coaching, I don't think there's a ton to talk about other than I think Travis Green's has done a great job the last couple of years, maybe hasn't gotten as much credit as he should. We know Daniel Alfredsson has departed for other pastures. We won't say where.
This is still really weird.
We'll skip past that part, but coaching staff, head coach certainly has shown he can guide this team forward. So let's get to the multi-million-dollar question. How do the Senators stack up in what should be a very, very tough Atlantic? Are they in the playoff mix? Is this a wild card or bust? Is there a path to the top 3, home ice, anything like that? Or is this a team that, like last year, is going to be life or death just to get into the playoffs? If they get there at all?
I think this team could be a wild card team, even with all these other teams in the Atlantic Division being tough. The goaltending I mentioned to you is going to be a big storyline. They'll go as far as Linus Ullmark can carry them. Here's one other thing I'll throw into the mix. No Brady Tkachuk on this team. We know the intangibles that he brings as a player. But what if everyone in that dressing room plays a little lighter? What if the fact that they don't have to worry about having a teammate where there was all that white noise with the podcast and him, which personally, I think the whole thing with the podcast, maybe it elevated to a point, maybe fans got a little too crazy with that.
But who listens to somebody on a podcast? Like, come on.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Who cares about podcasts and stuff anyway? Also, I'll just take the time to shout out the Chris Johnston show. But I'll say this too. Like, if I'm on the Ottawa Senators and I could just worry about the guys who are in the room and wondering, hey, is my captain going to be here? Is he going to get traded? All this other stuff, like, especially what you went through last year with all the different storylines around you, that should be a point where everyone in this team should be saying, hey, we were able to play through all those storms and make it to the playoffs last year. Why not us? Why not find a way to get a second gear? Because the expectations, of course, are always going to be high, but it shouldn't feel as dark as it was at different points last year, I think it could, there's a reasonable expectation it could propel them to play better. Maybe it's still a wild card team, but if they just plug along and do the right things, which is, again, limiting chances against, this was a team, not to bring up the Carolina Hurricanes again, they were tied with the Canes at the top of the league for fewest chances allowed per game. If they continue to play that style, if they get their contributions wherever they can get them offensively, if the goaltending is there, if their best players take a step, that's a playoff team as far as I'm concerned. And depending on who they run up against in the first round, maybe they go on a run with that. They just need to show everyone that the potential is worth betting on with this group. I'm not convinced that as much as Brady Tkachuk is not on this team anymore, that they're going to take that drastic of a step back. I'm not convinced that this is what's in store for this group unless someone gets injured or the goaltending falls apart, or I don't know, fate will dictate that. But I still think this is a playoff team.
I like it. Mostly optimistic, but very realistic as well. Thank you very much, Julian. We'll keep an eye on your work all summer, obviously, and heading into September, training camp, the season. And thank you also to producer Jeff and to you, the listener/viewer, for watching and listening to this episode of the Athletic Hockey Show. The Prospect Series will occupy this spot for the next 2 weeks. I will be back on August 24th with Murat. We're going to talk about how to fix the Winnipeg Jets, a team that did not make the playoffs last year and needs to get back there. So we will see you next time on the Athletic Hockey Show. Thank you again for listening and watching. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell to stay informed and catch new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And in the meantime, you can join our Discord community. We'll see you there.